Here is a fun game you can play at any Warhammer convention. Walk up to someone in a Space Wolves hoodie, look them dead in the eye, and say, "Magnus did nothing wrong." Then step back. Because what follows is not going to be a calm, measured discussion of the nuances of Horus Heresy lore. The thing is, and this is what makes Leman Russ such a fascinating character, they are going to be furious at you. Absolutely furious. And they are also going to know somewhere deep down that you have a point, because the story of Leman Russ is the story of the most loyal son the Emperor ever had. A man who followed every order without question, who burned when told to burn, who destroyed when told to destroy, who was the galaxy's greatest weapon pointed in whatever direction his father chose. And the story of how that absolute, unquestioning loyalty destroyed something it never should have touched. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Leandros was the Emperor's executioner, before he was the Wolf King, before he was a Primarch at all, he was a wolf, not metaphorically. Not in the raised with wolves learned their ways sense that you might apply to, say, a particularly outdoorsy child. He was raised by a she-wolf, on a death world that makes most war zones look like spa retreats. Fenris is a planet that seems personally offended by the existence of life, ice that covers continents, oceans that freeze and thaw in seasons lasting years, volcanic islands that rise and sink beneath a sea that is actively trying to kill everything in it, megafauna that would make a tyrannid pause for thought. The climate does not have good years. It has years where the dying is slower. When Leman Russ's gestation pod came screaming out of the sky and buried itself in the flank of a Fenrisian mountain, what emerged from the smoking crater was a Primarch infant, a being of superhuman genetics, designed to be one of the greatest warriors in human history, the gene son of the God Emperor of mankind. He was, in a word, helpless. A Fenrisian thunderwolf, enormous even by the frankly unreasonable standards of Fenrisian wildlife, found the infant, and instead of doing what every survival instinct should have been screaming at her to do, she adopted him. Not killed him, adopted him. The Primarch infant was raised alongside wolf cubs. As a wolf, for years, he ran with the pack, he hunted with the pack. He learned to read the land through a wolf's instincts, the smell of prey, the feel of the wind, the moment a hunt shifts from stalking to pursuit. He grew with two of those cubs who became his constant companions, Frecky and Jerry, who would be with him for the rest of his life. He was, by any reasonable assessment, feral. A hunting party from the tribe of the Russ encountered a predator raiding their food stores. They moved to deal with it the way Fenrisians deal with problems, aggressively and with bladed weapons, and found, in the middle of the wolves, something that was clearly not a wolf. It was a boy. A very large, very wild, completely feral boy who was baring his teeth at them. Someone had the sense to put their weapons down. The boy came with them. King Vingir gave the wild child a place in his court. Leman of the Russ, as they named him, learned everything at a speed that probably unnerved everyone watching. Language within weeks, weapons within months. Within a year he was fighting the tribe's enemies personally and winning with a margin that was becoming embarrassing for the enemies. He could tear oak trees out of the ground and snap them in half. He wrestled mammoths to the ground. He was once observed turning back an entire enemy army by himself, apparently because he was in the area and it seemed like the thing to do. When King Thengir died, nobody needed to have a conversation about succession. Leman Russ became king of the Russ, then king of the entire planet. The man, and I use that term loosely for someone whose social development began in a wolf pack, had arrived. He would have been perfectly happy here forever, probably. Then his father showed up. The Emperor of Mankind did not announce himself when he arrived on Fenris. He walked into Leman Russ's hall disguised as a wanderer, cloaked in psychic runes of disguise and confusion. Just an ordinary old man who happened to make every animal in the room back away and everyone sober enough to notice go very quiet and very still. Leman Russ was not intimidated. Leman Russ was never intimidated by anything. He looked at this stranger and demanded that the stranger prove himself worthy of sitting at his table. The Emperor, the single most powerful human being who has ever lived, agreed to a series of tests. Test 1, eating. This was not a gentle tasting menu. This was Fenrisian eating, consuming truly alarming quantities of food while your audience bangs on tables. Leman Russ won. The Emperor lost. Test 2, drinking. Fenrisian ale. which is to ordinary alcohol what a battleship is to a rowboat. Same result. Leman Russ won. The Emperor, for the second time, was outdone by his missing son in a competition that had no practical application whatsoever. Test 3. Combat. Leman Russ announced he could defeat the stranger in a fight. He said this after winning 2 drinking contests, so his confidence was, shall we say, elevated. The Emperor hit him once. One blow from the Emperor's power fist. Leman Russ went down. For the first and only time in his life on Fenris, Leman Russ had been beaten in single combat. He lay there for a moment, then he stood up, and he swore allegiance. Not because he had to, not because the Emperor compelled him. Because a Fenrisian warrior respects someone who can beat him in a fair fight. Because Leman Russ was under the wolf fur and the ale and the theatrical ferocity, a man of honor. Weeks later, literally weeks, the pace of Primarch education is frankly alarming. He was at the head of the Space Wolves Legion, heading into the Great Crusade. There is a title that follows Leman Russ through the Horus Heresy lore that is worth pausing on. The Emperor's Executioner. Most Primarchs had roles. The Lion was the strategic planner. Guilliman was the administrator. Sanguinius was the symbol of hope. Horus was the war master, the coordinator of everything. Russ was the one you sent when something needed to be destroyed and you needed it done without hesitation and without failure. When the Night of the Wolf happened, when Leman Russ was sent to confront Angron about the Butcher's Nails being forced on the entire World Eaters Legion, it went about as well as you would expect when you send one Primarch to tell another Primarch to stop doing something he is clearly going to keep doing. They fought, not a quick scuffle. A genuine battle between 2 of the physically strongest beings in existence, both sides barely able to tell their own wounds from the other's blood. The Emperor personally intervened and ordered them to stop. On Dulon, Russ and the Space Wolves fought alongside Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels. The enemy leader had insulted Russ's honor. Russ wanted to deal with him personally. Both legions assaulted the fortress simultaneously, and Leman Russ burst into the throne room ready to deliver the decisive blow, just in time to see Lionel Johnson take the enemy's head. Russ processed this for a moment. Then he walked up to Lionel Johnson and punched him in the jaw. The fight that followed lasted a week, 7 days. The 2 most feared warriors in the Great Crusade destroyed a considerable amount of the surrounding architecture because one of them was annoyed about not getting to kill a specific person. In the end, Russ started laughing, apparently realizing at some point how absurd this was, and in the moment of distraction the lion knocked him unconscious. Neither of them ever fully resolved their feelings about who won. This is who Leman Russ was during the Great Crusade, loyal, occasionally getting into week-long brawls with his brothers over points of honor. The Emperor's hammer pointed at problems and released, and then came the order that defined everything. Here is what you need to know about Magnus the Red before we continue. Magnus was a psyker, possibly the most powerful human psychic in the galaxy after the Emperor himself. He was also, by most accounts, genuinely trying to do the right thing. When Magnus discovered through his sorcery that Horus had fallen to chaos, he tried to warn his father. He forced a psychic message through the defenses around Terra, crashing through the protections guarding the Emperor's secret webway project, delivering his warning at the cost of everything he had. The Emperor's response was to send Leman Russ to deal with Magnus. Russ arrived at Prospero with his Space Wolves, with the Sisters of Silence, with the Legio Mortis Titans, with the Adeptus Custodes, with everything needed to destroy a legion and everything on its world, and he destroyed it. The burning of Prospero, libraries of knowledge accumulated over centuries, cities, a civilization of sorcerers who had contributed enormously to the Imperium's understanding of the galaxy. Magnus himself driven from the physical realm into the Eye of Terror. Russ followed his orders. He burned what he was sent to burn. And when it was over, when the chaos of battle settled into the grim reality of a world in ashes, something broke. Not Russ's loyalty. His loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute, but his confidence in his own judgment, in the Emperor's wisdom, in the clean clarity of a mission that in retrospect was anything but clean. He had burned a legion that had not turned traitor, had destroyed knowledge that could never be recovered, had driven Magnus into the arms of chaos, had in a very real sense created the Magnus the Red that would spend the next 10,000 years as one of the Imperium's greatest enemies. Because what was Magnus supposed to do after that? The Emperor had sent his wolf to deal with a warning his wolf's master did not want to hear. And Russ, unlike some of his brothers, was honest enough to understand what had happened once the smoke cleared. After the heresy fully erupted, Russ did what Russ does. He fought. When he finally tracked down Horus, hunting the War Master through the galaxy using Fenrisian rune priests searching the threads of fate, what happened at their meeting is one of the most debated moments in the entire lore. Russ fought Horus, the spear of Russ was used against the War Master, and here is the thing. Russ actually wounded him, drew blood on Horus at a moment when Horus had been empowered by the full attention of the four Chaos Gods and was arguably the most powerful being in the material universe outside of the Emperor himself. Some accounts suggest that the spear's blow partially cleansed the chaos corruption consuming Horus, that it cracked the shell of demonic empowerment just slightly. That it may have been one of the factors that allowed the Emperor to actually reach Horus in the final confrontation, not a perfectly defended fortress of warp power, but something slightly crucially weakened. The wolf found his prey, the wound he left mattered, but Russ couldn't finish it. The war continued, and Russ, unable to reach Terra in time for the siege, hosted a great feast instead. This sounds like a footnote. It isn't. 211, M31. The Horus heresy is over. The Emperor is on the golden throne. The galaxy has been broken in half and put back together with scar tissue and prayers. Leman Russ hosts a feast. His entire legion present. Great fires. Fenrisian ale in quantities that would hospitalize anyone who wasn't a space wolf. His wolves Freaky and Jerry at his side. At the height of the feast, Russ stood. He said, "In the end I will return. For the final battle. For the wolf time." He left the hall. He took his Verigir, his chosen warriors, and walked out into the dark. All except one. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, his most trusted companion, was told to stay. Bjorn asked why. Russ said that someone needed to remain who remembered, someone who could tell the story. Then the Wolf King walked into the Eye of Terror and disappeared. No death confirmed. No body found. No final battle recorded. He simply left and did not come back. Here is the detail that makes Space Wolves players absolutely insane at game nights. Magnus the Red knows where Leman Russ is, or at the very least claims to, or has implied it. The specifics of what Magnus actually knows are, like much Warhammer lore, deliberately unclear. But the suggestion is there, sitting in the background of every interaction between the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves. Your father's executioner walked into the place where you live. The Daemon Primarch of the Thousand Sons keeps whatever he knows to himself. This is objectively a power move of the highest order. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the warrior Russ left behind, is now the oldest dreadnought in existence. Interred in his sarcophagus for 10,000 years, woken every few centuries to tell the story of Russ's departure. His body has failed, his mind is ancient beyond reckoning, but the memory of that last night remains. Every 1,000 years, more or less, the Space Wolves wake him up and he retells it. Every 1,000 years, the Space Wolves listen to the oldest surviving witness to their father's disappearance tell the same story, looking for something they might have missed. He is the last thread connecting them to the moment the Wolf King left. Here is what the story of Leman Russ is actually about. Underneath all the drinking contests and burning worlds and legendary duels, it is about the cost of total loyalty. Every other Primarch who fell or failed did so because of their own qualities. Horus's ambition, Fulgrim's vanity, Magnus's arrogance, Lorgar's desperate need for faith. Their corruptions grew from something internal. Russ never fell. Russ never broke. Russ was exactly what the Emperor built him to be. Loyal, fierce, willing to do the terrible things that needed doing without flinching. And in that total reliability and that complete willingness to be the hammer pointing wherever his father directed it, he became the instrument of one of the greatest tragedies of the Horus heresy. He burned Prospero not because he hated Magnus, not because he thought it was right, because he was told to and he trusted the one who told him. He came to regret it. He said so openly, challenging the Emperor's wisdom in ways most of his brothers never dared. But regret does not rebuild libraries. Regret does not unburn a world. The Space Wolves believe in his return. They have believed for 10,000 years. The Wolf Time, the final battle at the end of everything, is when he promised to come back. Given the current state of the galaxy, with the Great Rift splitting everything in half, and demons pouring through and Primarchs returning across the board, the Space Wolves are watching the Eye of Terror with increasing intensity. Somewhere in there, a wolf is waiting. He said he would come back for the final battle. The final battle has been feeling increasingly imminent for a while now. Freaky and Jerry are not getting younger, wherever they are. The feast awaits. And somewhere in the heart of the galaxy's greatest nightmare, the Wolf King is probably picking a fight with something just to stay sharp. Some things never change.